what you reconstruct is literally your intellectual development. So those of you who, take notes in your books, make sure you hang on to your books too. Because your children and your children's children will look up and they'll find out when they're your age as you are now, they can look and see how your intellectual development unfolded, and it may even impact their own. A book, in other words, becomes more than one book. It becomes two books. The book and your book writing back to the book in conversation.
This is a work about the creation of aliens and the erection of fences, and he goes on. And I kind of underlined that, and I wrote, because it reminded me of the movie Fences, and I remember there's a part in it where they said something like fences have two main purposes: to keep people out or for protection. That's right. Encasing yourself inside the safe haven of your own world. So then I thought about that in the sense of, why did we need fences to begin with? Why?
Page 17. Where she goes, these immigrants to the United States understood that if they wanted to become real Americans, they must sever or at least greatly downplay their ties to their native country. And when I first read that, I first thought of my mom, because I'm a first generation student. So when I thought of my mom, she told me when she had to take her citizenship test, it was almost like she was erasing the fact that she's from a different country, and she had to learn everything about this country that even I don't even know, and I'm born here. And it just made me think of how the whole concept of othering yourself from your own country in order to come to this country to be othered by other people who've been othered and are othering more people.
The goal isn't to other people, to reinscribe the oppressions. The goal is for us to walk in our full humanity like everybody else, and instead of trying to create narrative strategies to kind of wean people into seeing us as human, which we see doesn't work. Every cop that kills somebody shows us that. Stand in our truth and say, let us as human beings have a human conversation. And that's the undiscovered country, brother. We aren't there yet.
Freedom and Justice, investigating the Black diaspora, and I really want to focus on how might you, as a vital member of the Howard community, optimize your history. We want to recognize, as we form our identities and try to stabilize ourselves, recognize the importance of interdisciplinarity in understanding and improving our status. And this is not to be underestimated, because if you can pull from the different disciplines that you're studying, the truth from your English studies, from your history studies, from your sociology studies, from your chemistry studies, your physics studies, they're all a part of a larger truth.
That memory is going to give rise to imagination. Imagination gives rise to these restorative lives that we'll talk about. Memory, that's where the records and the structures for viewing ourselves and for viewing others, that's where they're kept. All right. Imagination, what we can envision and mentally construct, those things that we can sort of pull and make real. The human brain is not, again, like those little gadgets that we play with all the time, right? It's constructive. It's always shaping and reshaping what it's got in there. So what the brain has in it is not static. Imagination brings into being something that's clearly distinguishable from pre-existing reality. That's what imagination does. Imagination emerges as a central dimension of humanness. But that's something that we do when our bellies are full and danger is at bay. We imagine new realities and we create. All right.
Let's go. What is academic excellence at Howard in 2017? The question of the day of sorts. So we're talking about Howard and its place and its role. It was important. The work that Thurgood Marshall and the law school did with Brown versus Topeka Board of Education was absolutely critical. But it was a fight. That's the fight y'all got to engage in. And you say the best thing that could happen for us would be that an intellectual class comes out of Howard that takes seriously an African and African diaspora curriculum. Either you got to have a conversation or not. Know what he meant, but you have to be willing to engage. When you make the declaration, you have to say, this is what I think, and this is the team that I'm on. This is how I'm gonna make the fight. You can't necessarily do it from a cushy space. You made the decision to be in a black space. We made a decision to be in a black space. So when you're pushing towards that, you have to stick with it.
Yes, I follow the freshman seminar Twitter, and I always look at the HE movements every week just to get like different perspectives on the topics that we discuss. And it's interesting to see like other people's perspectives on it, and seeing like people that you agree with, and also sort of opening your mind to things you might not have thought of.
Well, I kind of like it because it's like even people who don't necessarily go to Howard, like sometimes I'll see just like random people on the Twitter, and it's just nice to know that other people actually like care about what we talk about here at Howard, just in general.
How do we begin to talk about dismemberment from our own perspective and not from the perspective of Europe and a paternalistic kind of European lens? And so he brings these two ideas out and he juxtaposes them, the African idea versus the idea of Africa. And he says the African idea deals with the interactions and connections among African communities on the continent and in the diaspora, and I should add, from an internal lens and frame of reference of African people actively engaging in that process themselves. And the idea of Africa is a product of the West system of self-representation. That is, the idea of Africa is imposed, and the African ideas is attempting to remember Africa. The idea of the West is attempting to dismember Africa, and remembering it is an attempt to connect African people in space and time, to put Africa back together, to make Africa and African people whole after the assault on their humanity. And he's saying who is at the forefront of doing that is African scholars themselves. And indeed, that is a movement.
We were both in the same group, and our group project was called the Black Muslim Diaspora Movement, and we specifically focused on in America. So basically we wanted to connect the religion as a whole to politics. Yeah, so all in all, we just did our parts, got the work done, and learned a lot about a topic that I had no idea about.
Yeah, most of us didn't know about the topic at all, so it was kind of like learning from a blank slate. And it was just really good to actually see everyone come together. A lot of aha moments, like, oh, that makes sense. Oh, like, it was like a real,
But like, we wanted to kick some people out. Like, my group even got in like a really heated argument. Like, it was pretty intense. But like, we've like, for the most part, like always stayed on track and like always like got things done. So like, we're done our project early, which was like a good thing because everybody like really like incorporated their parts that they needed to do. So.
On Goree Island with the doorway just like this, called the door of no return because Africans are being led through the doorway.
We pour this first libation to that which created us out of the heart of the stars, into the space, into this moment that we exist in now. Ashe? Those who stayed in Africa after they had populated the world, those who had gone to every corner of the African continent. We pour to those who settled by the Great Nile River, who settled by the Limpopo and the Zambezi, who settled by the Congo River. We pour to their children, our ancestors. We pour to the millions whose bones now are on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. Those who fought and in their last breath died at Elmina in Ghana, died in Senegal on the island, who died in Central Africa as the Portuguese stuffed them into boats.
Very early age, they became valuable to the owner.
I saw the specific tribe that I come from listed on one of the most common places where the people in the African burial grounds came from, and that was really startling for me to find out. And it was actually a really great experience because I feel like I'm much wiser now and I know better, and I feel more inspired to find out more about my history and where I came from.
I thought co-curriculars were going to be a drag because we have to do 5 of them the whole semester. But I've learned stuff that I would have never learned in a predominantly white school. Like, for example, I talked to this lady who talked about reproductive rights for Black women, and how when she went to Howard University, she went to Freedman's Hospital, also known as Howard University Hospital, and she was given a defective IUD, and they wouldn't take it out of her, and they said that Black women shouldn't even have children in the first place. So I would have never learned anything about that.
Yeah, I went to the co-curricular that Reverend Otis presented. It was like the Stay Woke, and basically it was just a motivational co-curricular. He was talking about don't give up just because you're Black. It impacted me to make better decisions, life decisions, on campus, off campus. On campus, talk to everybody, be positive. Off campus, don't be afraid to speak.
Good experience, and honestly, freshman seminar it's something I couldn't get at any other school. So that's kind of been one of those points when people ask oh, what does Howard have that other PWIs wouldn't have? It's my first thing to go to is freshman seminar, and the things that we learned there, and the things that I walk into, and being around people of my own skin color. So
talked to my friends in the engineering department about freshman seminar because their intro class is quite different from ours, and I definitely think that we have the leg up on them there. I don't know if that's a mature way to say, but I definitely think that we have the leg up on them there, because I think that just the diversity of experience and the richness that is contained within the curriculum of freshman seminar is something that is kind of unique in the conversations, at least relative to the conversations that I have with engineers, other people in other schools at the university, and my friends who go to other universities.
One thing that I love about Howard was you're surrounded by such greatness, such Black excellence. You're reminded how you are magic. You're surrounded by people that look like you. You're constantly being told you are important by people who look like you, and I think that's most important. The culture, being around so many Black people. When I was first looking for colleges, going to an HBCU wasn't a priority of mine, but then applying for Howard, I'm so glad that I came here, being surrounded by all this greatness.